Hello everyone, I'm Carrie the Hyped Up Hufflepuff, and today I'm going to be recording my January reading wrap-up. Now, in January I read a total of 17 books. Not the most I've ever read, but definitely not the least. And of those, I read 5 physical books. The rest were all audiobooks. So today we are going to start with the physical books and then work our way to the audiobooks, because it's just going to make it a lot easier. The first book that I read in January was The Sun and Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing that. It is a collection of Rupi's poetry, and her books always get me right there, right in the heart. There's a reason that I don't read poetry a lot, and it's because it kind of just like breaks me down from the inside. But this was one of the 2 books that I gave 5 stars for the month. If you've never read her poetry, I recommend it. I do, but maybe save it for when you need to cry. Because she will almost definitely make you cry and make you think, and maybe challenge you on a fundamental level. Make no promises. Anyway, that's Sun Under Her Flowers by Rupi Kaur. The next book I want to discuss is Born This Way by Paul Vitagliano. It's a series of little biographical blurbs, basically, of people discussing how they were basically treated as a child, a gay child somewhere on the LGBTQI spectrum, and how they grew up. It's just all sorts of different people and their experiences. There are little pictures to go with each story. I'm not great at rating nonfiction books because, I mean, how am I supposed to rate this? It's not fictional. They didn't make this stuff up. But I thought it was well put together and interesting read, and I am always around for pro-LGBTQIA literature. The next book that I want to discuss is So Be It by Sarah Weeks. It is a middle grade novel about a girl named Heidi and her mentally disabled mother, who does not remember anything about her past and thinks that her name is So Be It. At least that is the information that she can communicate to Heidi and her basically adopted mother at this point. And the book basically circulates around Heidi's adventure and her journey to try and figure out more about her mother and more about her own past. This was a really sweet book. It was a really interesting book, extremely touching. Kind of saw a few things coming. It was a little predictable, but at the same time, it was worth sticking around for. That being said, I do feel like it was dramatically outside of my age range. Like, usually I can kind of get away with like a middle grade, but this was like, closer to elementary school. Like, even when I was in middle school, I wasn't reading books like this. But still, it's a good book, and if you have any kids around this age range, or just like books around this, age range, have a go. It's a good read. I think I gave it about 3.5 or 4 stars. Not positive. Definitely wasn't a 5. Definitely wasn't a 1. It was just kind of in the middle, like, it's fine. This next book I'm really excited to talk about, and if you haven't heard of it, then I don't really know what to tell you. It's Jurassic Park by Michael Crichton. I have wanted to read this ever since I found out it was a book, which was years and years and years ago. But it seemed like I could never really find a copy. And then one day I finally found a copy of it in the used bookstore. And I ate it up, every single bit. I was sitting there at like social events reading. Like, it did not matter what I was supposed to be doing. I was reading. And finished it in no time at all, and this is one of those books that it had me laughing out loud and like audibly gasping, and just it made me cry, it made me scream a little. I had to put it down more than once because I was just so shook, basically. But yeah, really good. This is my second 5-star read for the month. I loved it even more than the movies, and it's one of my favorite movies ever. So, that should tell you something. If you haven't seen the movie, go watch the movie. And if you haven't read the book, please read the book. They're both good. They're both wonderful. Just a warning though, I'm gonna give you a trigger warning for infanticide. At the very least. Yeah, that kind of caught me off guard. But yeah, otherwise, you're probably good. I know I said that I was going to do all of the physical books at once, but for these two I'm going to kind of do them out of order because one is the original and the next one is a sequel. So the next book that I want to talk about is The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. Extremely emotional. If you haven't heard about it, it is a dystopian book basically based around the premise that humanity has become sterile and a highly Christian organization of sorts has taken over society. It's creepy on so many levels, but it's called The Handmaid's Tale because there are individuals who are still able to have children who have proven that they're fertile, and they are called handmaids and are personally selected to basically breed for the society. They don't get a choice in the matter. They just, yeah, they're picked to do it and are selected for certain families, and it's done in a way where they claim there's consent, but honestly, I'm gonna go ahead and tell you now, there's a huge trigger warning for rape. It's very uncomfortable. For this one, I would honestly recommend reading the book first and then going to read the show, because I have seen the show as well, and the show was much more triggering, honestly, than the book. The book is good, but also tread lightly. Still, this one got, no, not this one, sorry. The Handmaid's Tale got 4.5 out of 5 stars, I believe, and then the next book that I want to discuss, that I was about to jump the gun on, is The Testaments by Margaret Atwood, which takes place 15 years after The Handmaid's Tale, and reveals that one of the people that we followed throughout the original was actually basically a spy for the other side, and I'm here for that kind of content, you know. And yeah, it just tells all these different stories from the perspective of different people. It was really well written. It didn't really give me the impression that, you know, she wrote it out of duress or anything like that. Like, you could tell that it was something that she was still very passionate about. And I'm glad that she took the time to give us a sequel for such an influential and amazing story, you know. Alright, so that ends the physical book portion of this video. All of the books that I discuss from here on out are all going to be audiobooks of some form. The next book that I want to discuss is Wishful Drinking by Carrie Fisher. It is an autobiographical book discussing her own life, basically, and her struggles with drug use and alcoholism and depression. It's a very moving book. I ended up giving it a 3.5 or a 4, I believe. There was a little bit of problematic language in there, I believe, that threw me off a bit. And honestly, she isn't always the most adept at writing. Like, it is a very emotional story. I enjoyed reading it. And I adore Carrie Fisher in general, but her books are not always the most well written. You can tell that she is an actress first, or was an actress first rather, and a writer second. No offense meant, still a book that I enjoyed reading. I haven't disliked reading any of her books thus far. I'm just of the opinion that she is a better actress than a writer. There's nothing wrong with that. The next book is The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Washington Irving, which, as you know, is a classic. So it might be a bit controversial for me to say I gave it 3 stars. And the reason for that is I love the actual, like, legend and lore of Sleepy Hollow. I find it extremely interesting. So going back and reading the original story was honestly slightly disappointing in a way, because I already have all of this knowledge built up about the outside lore, what has developed, the established canon, if you will. And Washington Irving's writing is a bit dry, I'm not gonna lie, but it was still enjoyable. There was still, there was more than one part that was still a bit creepy. I still enjoyed it. It just is not going to be on any, you know, top book list of mine. I understand if you enjoy it, for me, it was just kind of fine. This next book is another one that I'm really excited to talk about. It is Camilla by J. Sheridan Le Fanu. Sorry. Not an extremely well-known author. And I keep forgetting the name. But Camilla is a vampire story. And it is the vampire story which inspired Bram Stoker's Dracula, which is why I wanted to read it in the first place. It's like, okay, I've read Dracula now, so I should read what inspired it. And it revolves around a girl who's living in a castle with her father, and ends up taking in a sickly woman around her age, who she had seen previously in a dream. Not long after, a series of attacks start happening. Well, rather, not attacks necessarily, but people keep on falling mysteriously ill. But it's fairly obvious that it's an attack of some sort. And this book, let me tell you, they got away with so much. This book was written in like 1872 or something like that. It was in the 1800s. And there is lesbian romance and eroticism all up in this bitch. I mean, it's not like graphic or anything. There's no sex necessarily, but still, there is lust, there is passion, there is lesbian eroticism from a book from the 1870s. And he got away with it because one of them was a vampire and they said it didn't count. Anyway, I just wanted to rant about it a little bit because I really adored the story in general, but I feel like I kind of enjoy the story behind it a little bit more. The next book that I want to talk about is actually a trilogy, so I want to talk about them all at once. I kind of read them all around the same time period. It's the Scythe series by Neil Shusterman. That includes Scythe, Thunderbird, and The Toll. And I listened to the audiobook for all three and enjoyed all three. I have to say, though, that I think Scythe was my favorite, The Toll was probably my second favorite, and then Thunderbird my third. All of them, though, so good. Basically, it takes place in a society, a dystopian society, of course, where no one is able to really die anymore because of nanotechnology that heals you. So these individuals were created that were called scythes, whose responsibility was to glean people and remove them from society and kill them, since the population had to be thinned out somehow. And it's a really interesting premise, but as you can imagine, some of these people ended up abusing their power because, you know, it's the elite group of people chosen to kill people legally. But yeah, some people started abusing their power, and if you want to know what else happens there, read the books. I'm not giving you any spoilers. I will say, though, that in the third book, there is an individual who is gender fluid and is represented in a positive way, and it makes me really freaking happy. I'm just gonna go ahead and say that now. I feel like they were in the end of The Toll, primarily, and that kind of gets discussed a little bit more at the end of The Toll. But either way, that is the first time I think that I have seen positive gender fluid representation in literature, like, ever. So yeah, props to you, Neil Shusterman. We need more of that, definitely. Preferably written by people who actually are gender fluid, but you know, we gotta take what we can get right now. So in January, I got really into kind of gothic literature. I guess I read Camilla and was just kind of like, give me more creepy shit, please. But the next book that I want to discuss is Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. That's M-A-U-R-I-E-R. And it was not quite as good as Camilla. I was a little disappointed. It's kind of a similar setup to Crimson Peak. Girl is a caregiver, ends up falling in love with the person who hired her, moves in with him, and it kind of seems like the ghost of his ex-wife is lingering around. She gets suspicion that he might still have feelings for her and resents her for the fact that she resembles her, and finds out that no, he actually hated his ex-wife. And there's a lot more to it than that. Blah, blah, blah. I can't talk tonight. There's a lot more to it than that. And it was interesting, I'm not gonna lie. But it was short, and I felt like there was a lot more that could be done with it. That being said, it was interesting for what it was, and was just slightly better than fine. If you want to look it up again, that was Rebecca by Daphne de Maurier. M-A-U-R-I-E-R. The next short story, technically, that I read is another example of Gothic literature, and is a classic. It is the Yellow Wallpaper. I wrote down the Yellow Paper, but I believe it is the Yellow Wallpaper, by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. It is basically the story of a woman who just had a baby and is going through postpartum depression and is contained and put in a single room and is not allowed to leave, and the yellow wallpaper in the room starts driving her insane. And it's basically a journey through her mind and what she is going through. And the entire thing was brought about by the state of how people treated women after they give birth, and the state of medicine and postpartum depression. It actually ended up helping make definite changes in, the medical field when it comes to postnatal care and stuff like that, which I thought was awesome. Charlotte was apparently a huge feminist, and that was part of the goal of this book. Again, it's another one of those things where it's like, yeah, the story is good, but I kind of find the story behind it a little more interesting. But either way, I ended up giving the story a 4 and encourage you to look it up, but just know it's a little unnerving and a little all over the place. It might make you feel some kind of way. I don't know. The next book I read is M is for Magic by Neil Gaiman. I have to say this is the first time where I have read anything by him that sort of made me uncomfortable. It's supposed to be a children's book full of stories for children, and yet there are so many of them that have sexual content. I mean, not like graphic sexual content, but still to the point where it made me very uncomfortable. Like, we're talking about a troll under a bridge. Why are you describing his penis in depth, Neil Gaiman? What you doing here? And he also kind of pulled it from another short story and repeated a lot of things. So that was a little disappointing. But some of them I loved, and some of them I was just kind of on. Overall, I gave the book a 3 because I didn't hate it, but I didn't love it. I don't really feel passionately about it one way or another. There are a couple of stories that I might recommend reading, but also maybe don't read it to your kids unless you want them reading about the size of a troll dick. The next book that I want to discuss is The Death of Ivan Ilich by Leo Tolstoy. It is another classic, I believe, and kind of ended up discussing our hesitance to talk about death, and when we're faced with it, our hesitation to face it. Our culture in general is not exactly very death positive. We're very much a death denying society, and he touched on that very well. I thought he did that quite efficiently. That being said, it was also very dry and immensely boring in places, so it ended up getting about a 3.5. No offense, Tolstoy. You're obviously a wonderful writer. He's not my cup of tea. I can't do it. That being said, if that is something that you can kind of cope with and you don't mind, dry writing, and it doesn't interfere with your enjoyment, then I would recommend looking it up. It's called The Death of Ivan Ilich. And yeah, it just has a lot to say about death and how we handle it. The next book is Odd and the Frost Giants by Neil Gaiman. I'll confess I only started reading this while listening to it rather, because I thought it was a part of the Odd Thomas canon by Dean Koontz, and I was a little disappointed when I figured out that wasn't what it was about. That being said, it does kind of delve into Norse mythology and that sort of thing. It was another one of those books by Gaiman where I honestly wasn't super into it. It was fine. You know, it was fine. But it didn't really live up to the hype of Coraline and the Graveyard Book and Fortunately the Milk and just all these other things that I've read and adored. I'm like, what are you doing, Gaiman? What's going on, man? Huh? I feel like we need to talk. This is the second book that I've read by you. It isn't bad, it's just like, meh. Step up your game, Gaiman. The last book I want to discuss is The Island of Dr. Moreau by H.G. Wells. I have yet to read anything by H.G. Wells that I have not absolutely loved. I love every single thing that H.G. Wells writes. I've read The Magic Shelf and Time Machine and War of the Worlds, and just every single thing by him I love so much. It's so good. So yeah, this one ended up getting, I think, a 4 or a 4.5. And basically it is about a man who ends up kind of shipwrecked on an island with a scientist, and he thinks that the individual is turning men into animals, but it's kind of the other way around. He's turning animals into men, and kind of the consequences of those actions. And it's just a super interesting book. It's another kind of like gothic read, rather disturbing read, and it's just really interesting from start to finish. The movie is also good, but I honestly prefer the book in this case, even though it is an older book, and I feel like it translated to the era fairly well still. I enjoyed reading it anyway. I realized that I didn't really talk about what I was reading and drinking at the moment, and that's partially because I'm not drinking anything at the moment, like, which never happens. I don't know how I don't have anything to drink right now. I feel lost. I need to make some coffee directly when I get off of this. I don't care that it's almost 8 p.m. I'm getting some coffee. But yeah, and as far as what I'm reading, I'm sort of reading The Lost World by Michael Crichton. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not liking it as much as Jurassic Park. Sorry, mixing it up with the new movies, but I'm not liking it quite as much as the previous book, but it is still good so far. I'm about 3/4 of the way through. I'm almost done, but I've been in a huge reading slump all February, and I've been in a huge booktube slump too, which is why this is coming out at the end of February, because I'm just an incompetent individual who cannot consistently make content and edit content. Sorry. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today and for watching my January reading wrap-up. Hopefully I'll see you again later. Don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and most importantly, love yourself. Bye.